was getting fed up with my neighbor. I'd only seen her once. Her relentlessly loud radio had my floor vibrating. I'd banged feverishly on the wall, and in response, she only turned it up louder. She listened to some evangelical AM Christian channel. I'm now an agnostic who could recite scripture more accurately than a devout Baptist. One night, I had to get to bed early for a 6:30 a.m. Zoom meeting, and I'd had enough. I stomped out of my apartment and angrily rapped my fist on her door. The radio went up another few notches before I began literally kicking her door down. In this moment, the girl living across the hall from me opened her door in her pajamas, wiping her eyes ahead of a dark living room, obviously awakened from her slumber, brows furrowed with disdain. "God," she began. I thought maybe she was angry with me, but then she continued with, "It never ends with her." Just as I was about to respond, I heard the clicking of the doorknob behind me. The girl across the hall's look of horror said all I needed to know. When I turned to look at the woman, I was in shock. She must have been in her mid to late 50s. The first thing that assaulted my senses was the foul smell that instantly punched me in the face. Before I had even a moment to comprehend the pungent odor, her appearance alone forced every hair on my body to stand at attention. Her hair was ratty and matted, sticking up and out on all sides like she'd intentionally stuck her fingers in a light socket. The tips were blood red, receding down to gray roots, looking like she hadn't dyed it in months. Her face was pale and weathered, leathery as some albino reptile with cracks and lines all over, like a map of the Mojave Desert. Her nose resembled a bird's beak, her cheeks contoured, and her eyes had big, black irises sunken into cavernous sockets in her head, making her look emaciated. What was most disquieting was that her stain-covered light blue robe was partially open, exposing her saggy left breast, dangling like a missile wrapped in a sack made of flesh. In her skeletal, bony fingers was a long cigarette, 3/4 of the way smoked, but the ashes not flicked. She took a puff and blew it in my face, tapping the cigarette ashes to her floor without care. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. My veins were pulsating with dread when I got a look at her walls, all etched with a sharp object and drawn with red and black marker crosses, both upright and upside down. Standing atop her muted TV, emitting a picture of nothing but deep blue static hues, was a giant wooden crucifix with Christ nailed to it. And scattered along her floor was garbage, from Chinese food containers to ripped open packs of baby wipes. Not a word was ever spoken. The look in her eyes said pure religious indoctrination and evil. A Christian fanatic with no regard for other people, her apartment, or hygiene. I knew this not just because of the hellscape that was her room, or the scent of what I later could only identify as roadkill emanating from some dark corner, but because of her teeth. She flashed me a mouthful of essentially broken, missing, and rotting elongated corn kernels before slamming the door in my face. I put in earplugs, but they were of almost no help. I popped some Benadryl, and despite the religious gibberish seeping through the walls, I was able to doze off in a state of extreme fatigue for just a little while. I awoke sometime later in the middle of the night to just silence. For the first time in my 3 weeks of living here, she turned off her radio. The calmness was actually eerie. But I was about to be faced with something I'd not ever seen even in my worst nightmares. I woke on top of my covers, shoes still on, facing my bedroom door, which was wide open. I'd never leave it open. Ever since I was a child, I'd been terrified of dark hallways, and this night was only a justification of my phobia. Amidst the warm glow of my hallway nightlight, I found myself in what I thought at first was only a bad dream, until my hoodie zipper stung me as it pricked out one of my arm hairs. I wasn't dreaming. In my doorway was the dark silhouette of a figure staring down at me. The wild, matted outline of hair told me that it was one of two things: an evil clown or my psychotic neighbor. The wafting scent of cigarette ash confirmed the latter. I was frozen, unable to speak or move. Her eyes were wide and bulging from their sockets. From the little that I could make out, I could see the expression of fury in her gaze. "You really should leave your door locked," she muttered in a deep, scratchy voice, a voice irreparably marred from decades of inhaling carcinogens. It was utterly unnerving. I could see that she was grasping something in her hand, but she turned and walked out before I could make it out. I was petrified, frozen, and unable to draw a single breath. I didn't sleep well that night. Not at all, in fact. The very next day, I spoke to the landlord. The words barely escaped my lips before his face degraded from passivity to rage, and he spat angrily the words, "That's it! I've had enough of that old lady. Her sister promised she'd keep her in check." I asked what he meant when he said, "Sister," but he thrust his shovel over his shoulder and huffed off on his haunches to the management office. I hadn't even had a chance to tell him about the smell. Only one more day had passed before the odor got so bad, I could hear people opening their doors one by one and loudly discussing it. I could sense unease in one older lady's voice. I was on my way out the door to go to my girlfriend's house. On the way out, I saw the girl from across the hall talking to the others. I don't know what the smell is, but I saw her dragging something to the dumpster. Of course, I was thinking what all of you are right now. It's her dead sister. But no. She said it was a small bag the size of maybe a cat or a miniature dog. I left for the night and got home around 3 p.m. the next day. Police were all over the parking lot and, as you could imagine, littered throughout my hallway. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is a crime scene. If you need to grab some of your things, that's fine. For the next few hours, we need you to find somewhere else to go." I came home later that night to find her room covered in police tape and a small gathering of residents congregating in the hallway. I immediately joined them, and what I found out was utterly nightmarish. The police were called on her after she dragged another stinking garbage bag to the dumpster. So, a neighbor named Joy's husband William went out there with gloves and ripped into it. In the bag, he discovered a hand. He didn't look further. It turns out the woman named Lois was a violent schizophrenic. She had lived with her sister, but she died one night, apparently in her sleep. Lois, speaking fast like a meth fiend, was heard explaining to the police that she didn't have anywhere to bury her, so she cut her to pieces with a variety of knives and a box cutter after having a vigil in the grace of God for her sister in her living room. She said she hadn't let anyone know because she didn't want her sister to leave. I still don't know why she was placed in handcuffs, but I presume it's because of her mental illness. She was being transported to a mental hospital. Though I wonder if it was for something else. Maybe her sister hadn't just died in her sleep. Why do I think this? Because another neighbor, a guy about my age in his mid-20s, told me a blood-chilling story. He said that one night, a few weeks ago, he was watching TV with his fiancée when all of a sudden he heard a noise. The floor of his living room creaked behind him. He turned around to find Lois standing in their doorway, brandishing an opened box cutter. And what she said, I'll never forget. "You shouldn't leave your door unlocked. You never know who might live next to you," before turning and walking out. He called the police and they said they couldn't just knock on her door and arrest her. But if she ever leaves her apartment, they could. I'm not sure how much they needed to clean in her apartment, but it was 2 months before I got another neighbor. Now it's quieter. My door is always locked, but still, in my nightmares it never is. Hello guys, remember, if you have a story you'd like to be featured in one of our videos, you can send it to trueterrortales@gmail.com. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed the video. It would be a great help if you could subscribe and comment on what you thought of the video.